Welcome to the Unveiled Epic channel. Today, we're diving deep into an unexplored historical mystery. In the hush of a winter's eve in 1809, deep within the shadowed embrace of a humble log cabin in County, Kentucky, where the wind whispered secrets through the chinks in the rough-hewn walls, a child was born destined to unravel threads of fate woven from ancient enigmas long buried in the earth's forgotten corners. His cries mingling with the distant howl of wolves as his mother, Nancy Hanks Lincoln, held him close, her eyes reflecting the flickering light of a single tallow candle. Unaware that this boy, Abraham, would one day bridge the chasms of time, connecting the raw frontier of America to hidden truths from civilizations lost to the sands of antiquity, truths that spoke of unity forged in fire and freedom etched in stone. As the family scraped by on the barren soil, Young's earliest memories were of hardship, the bite of poverty like an unyielding frost. His father Thomas, a wandering soul who chased elusive dreams across the wilderness, moving them to Knob Creek Farm, where the boy toddled through muddy fields, his small hands grasping at wildflowers that hid ancient arrowheads from native tribes whose legends whispered of star-fallen mysteries. Relics perhaps from even older wanderers who crossed vast oceans before, carrying scrolls of forbidden knowledge that echoed in the boy's unspoken questions. And as the family uprooted again to the untamed lands of Indiana in 1816, tragedy struck like a hidden serpent. His mother succumbing to the milk sickness that ravaged the frontier, her final words a soft lullaby about enduring light in darkness, leaving, at just 9 years old, to grapple with grief that carved deep rivers in his young heart, rivers that would one day flood with revelations from ancient scrolls rumored to have been smuggled across the Atlantic by early explorers, scrolls speaking of pharaohs who dreamed of republics and Greek philosophers whose ideas of liberty were etched in marble, ideas that seemed to haunt the boy's dreams as he lay on a dirt floor, staring at the stars through cracks in the roof, his stepmother Sarah Bush Johnston arriving like a gentle dawn, bringing books that ignited his insatiable hunger for knowledge, borrowed tomes from neighbors that he devoured by the dim glow of firelight, his lanky frame hunched over pages of Shakespeare and the Bible, where verses hinted at moral compasses forged in the fires of Mount Sinai. But beneath those familiar words sensed layers untold, perhaps echoes of Babylonian codes or Egyptian hieroglyphs that spoke of emancipation from chains unseen, his self-education a solitary quest through the wilderness of ideas, chopping wood by day to earn pennies for more books, his axe splitting logs with a rhythm that mirrored the beating heart of a nation yet to be tested. And in those quiet nights, as owls hooted ancient calls, he uncovered a hidden diary in the attic of an abandoned cabin, its pages yellowed with age. Inscribed by a forgotten settler who claimed descent from alchemists fleeing Europe, detailing a mysterious artifact buried near the Ohio River, a stone tablet etched with symbols that promised the key to unbreakable unions, a discovery that sparked in Young a lifelong pursuit of truths veiled in mystery, truths that would weave through his path like invisible threads, pulling him toward a destiny intertwined with the fate of a divided land, as he grew into a towering youth of 6 feet 4 inches. His gangly limbs belying a strength honed by rail-splitting and flatboat journeys down the Mississippi, where the muddy waters carried whispers of voodoo priestesses in New Orleans who guarded secrets from African kings, rituals of freedom dances that echoed the boy's own yearnings. And there, amid the bustling ports, he witnessed the auction blocks where human souls were bartered like chattel, a sight that seared his conscience, planting seeds of abolition that would bloom in debates yet to come. But hidden in the underbelly of those markets were tales of escaped slaves bearing maps to underground caverns holding relics from Atlantis, or so the rumors went, lost cities whose philosophies of equality predated even Rome. And ever the skeptic yet dreamer filed these away in his mind's vast library, returning to Illinois in 1830, where he settled in New Salem, a frontier village buzzing with opportunity and intrigue, working as a store clerk and postmaster. His honesty earning him the moniker Honest, as he measured goods with fairness that harkened back to ancient scales of justice from Hammurabi's code. But one fateful day, while sorting mail, he stumbled upon a sealed letter addressed to no one. Its contents a cryptic message about a secret society of scholars preserving knowledge from the Library of Alexandria, knowledge that included treatises on democracy smuggled out before the flames. And though he dismissed it as folly, the words lingered, fueling his entry into law, self-studying under the tutelage of borrowed law books, passing the bar in 1836, and riding the circuit as a frontier lawyer, his deep voice booming in dusty courtrooms, defending the downtrodden with wit and wisdom that uncovered hidden motives like a detective peeling back layers of an onion. And in one obscure case in Sangamon County, he represented a widow accused of witchcraft. Her defense hinging on an ancient amulet she claimed was a relic from Celtic Druids, inscribed with runes that foretold the end of bondage, a twist that revealed her accuser's own fraudulent schemes tied to land grabs echoing colonial deceptions, winning the case and deepening's fascination with forgotten histories that mirrored the growing schisms in America over slavery. As he entered politics in 1834, elected to the Illinois General Assembly, his speeches railing against the peculiar institution with a fervor born of those early on the Mississippi, but woven into his rhetoric were subtle nods to ancient rebellions, like Spartacus's uprising or the Hebrew Exodus, stories he believed held keys to modern liberation. And as he courted Mary Todd, a refined Kentucky belle whose intellect matched his own, their union in 1842 brought both joy and sorrow, their home in Springfield a haven amid political storms, yet shadowed by the loss of sons and grief that forged in a resolve as unyielding as the pyramids whose builders, he pondered in quiet moments, might have encoded messages of equality in their very stones, and rising through the ranks, he ran for U.S. Senate in 1858 against Stephen, their legendary debates crisscrossing Illinois like dueling comets, towering frame and homespun humor contrasting fire, as they clashed over slavery's expansion, declaring, "A house divided against itself cannot stand," a phrase echoing ancient proverbs from Confucian texts or biblical parables, but to the crowds, had received an anonymous tip about a hidden network of abolitionists guarding a vault in Chicago, containing documents from the Renaissance humanists who drew from lost Arabian manuscripts on human rights, documents that inspired his arguments with a mysterious depth, turning the debates into a battle not just of policy, but of eternal truths. Though he lost the Senate seat, his national profile soared like an eagle over the prairies, leading to his nomination as the Republican candidate for president in 1860, a campaign fraught with whispers of conspiracy. As Southern states seethed at the prospect of this rail splitter from the North, and on election night, as votes tallied in his favor, becoming the 16th president, telegraphs buzzed with coded messages hinting at assassination, plots tied to shadowy cabals descended from Knights Templar, guardians of secrets that could upend empires. And as he boarded the train to Washington, D.C. in 1861, disguised to evade threats, the nation teetered on Civil War's brink, South Carolina's secession igniting the powder keg, Fort Sumter's fall in April plunging the Union into chaos, his leadership tested in the crucible of conflict, his lanky form packing the White House corridors by lamplight, poring over maps and missives, his beard grown to hide a perceived weakness but symbolizing a sage's wisdom, and amid the cannon's roar, he uncovered a forgotten journal in the Library of Congress, penned by a Revolutionary War spy who detailed encounters with Native American shamans revealing prophecies from Mayan calendars about a great divider who would become a unifier, prophecies that steeled resolve to preserve the Union, issuing calls for troops as battles raged from Bull Run to Antietam, the blood-soaked fields whispering of ancient wars like Troy's fall, where hubris divided kin, and in the war's fog. Spies brought tales of Confederate plots involving alchemical experiments to forge unbreakable weapons, drawing from medieval grimoires smuggled from Europe, twists that countered with his own ingenuity, establishing the Secret Service not just for protection but to hunt these esoteric threats. And as the war ground on, his mind turned to emancipation, drafting the proclamation in secret, inspired by those ancient scrolls of liberty, signing it on January 1, 1863. Freeing slaves in rebel states with a stroke that echoed Moses parting the seas, but hidden within the document's folds was a cipher, a nod to forgotten Freemason codes that Lincoln, a rumored initiate, used to signal allies in the shadows, allies who smuggled freedmen north via underground railroads laced with mysterious holding relics from African empires like Mali, where kings ruled with justice unbowed, and as Union armies advanced under Grant and Sherman. Delivered the Gettysburg Address in November 1863, standing on hallowed ground where thousands fell, his words government of the people by the people, for the people, resounding like an incantation from Athenian assemblies, yet infused with a personal mystery. For days before, he had dreamed of a spectral visitor, perhaps the ghost of Pericles or a long-lost ancestor, urging him to heal the nation's wounds, a vision that added ethereal depth to his oratory. Captivating the crowd in the chill autumn air, and as re-election loomed in 1864, amid plots and counterplots, he secured victory, his second inaugural address pleading with malice toward none, with charity for all, a plea echoing Buddhist sutras of compassion or Stoic philosophies from Rome, philosophies he explored in stolen moments, discovering a hidden compartment in the White House desk containing letters from about Enlightenment ideals drawn from Persian mystics. Revelations that shaped his vision of post-war reconstruction, a unity forged in forgiveness. But as the war neared its end with Lee's surrender at Appomattox in April 1865, tragedy lurked in the wings. At Ford's on the 14th, as he watched, our American cousin, with Mary, laughter masking the approach of John Wilkes Booth, an actor driven by fanaticism and perhaps darker forces, whispers of a cabal seeking to bury those ancient truths Lincoln had begun to unveil. The assassin's bullet piercing the night, felling the president in a moment of cruel irony, his body carried across the street to house, where he lingered till morning, his final breath a sigh that carried the weight of unresolved mysteries. And in the aftermath, as the nation mourned, his legacy as the great emancipator took root, a moral symbol of American freedom. But beneath the public grief lay hidden stories, tales of his private quests for forgotten knowledge, from Kentucky cabins to White House vaults, weaving ancient discoveries into the fabric of a reborn republic, stories that whispered of plot twists where allies decoded his final messages, ensuring the Union's endurance, rising tension in secret societies clashing over relics of power, climaxing in the preservation of democracy's flame, and concluding in the quiet satisfaction of a nation healed, though echoes of those mysteries linger still, inviting dreamers to uncover more. In the lingering shadows of that fateful night at Ford's, where the echo of a single gunshot shattered the fragile peace of a nation on the mend, Abraham Lincoln's spirit seemed to hover like a guardian wraith over the turbulent currents of Reconstruction, his unfinished symphony of unity now passed to lesser hands, yet infused with the enigmatic threads he had pulled from history's hidden loom. Threads that connected the Emancipation Proclamation not just to the bloodied fields of Gettysburg, but to ancient papyri unearthed in Egyptian tombs, where pharaohs decreed freedoms for the oppressed in hieroglyphs that mirrored his own bold script. And as Johnson ascended to the presidency amid whispers of conspiracy deeper than Booth's deranged plot, rumors swirled in the smoke-field of Washington about a secret codex Lincoln had been deciphering. A leather-bound volume smuggled from European archives by Union spies, detailing alchemical formulas for societal transmutation drawn from Renaissance mystics, who themselves borrowed from Arabian scholars preserving Plato's Republic in the flames of forgotten wars, a codex that vanished the night of the assassination, perhaps spirited away by loyalists to prevent its powers from falling into the hands of those who sought to rebind the chains of division. And in the years that followed, as radical Republicans clashed with Southern redeemers over the soul of the reunited states, intrepid historians and adventurers began uncovering clues to Lincoln's private obsessions, like the peculiar markings on his top hat, etched faintly with symbols resembling those from Sumerian clay tablets that spoke of laws uniting disparate tribes under one banner, symbols that a young scholar in Springfield, inspired by tales of honest nocturnal readings, decoded to reveal a map leading to a buried cache near the old family farm in Kentucky, where artifacts from pre-Columbian voyagers, perhaps Phoenicians who sailed the Atlantic eons before Columbus, held carvings of democratic assemblies predating even Athens, discoveries that fueled underground societies dedicated to Lincoln's vision, societies that operated in the veiled undercurrents of American expansion, influencing figures like Frederick, whose own writings echoed those ancient calls for justice as he advocated for the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, amendments that wove the fabric of freedom, yet left mysteries unsolved, such as the enigmatic dreams Lincoln confided to his diary about visitations from spectral Native American elders, bearing totems from lost civilizations like the mound builders of the Mississippi Valley, totems prophesying a great war of brothers that would birth a stronger eagle. And as the nation pushed westward on iron rails that Lincoln himself had championed through the Pacific Railway Act, explorers in the Rockies stumbled upon caverns etched with petroglyphs that aligned eerily with the president's debates on slavery, depicting chained figures breaking free under a divided house symbol. A plot twist revealing possible influences from ancient migrants who crossed the Bering Strait carrying Asian philosophies of harmony amid strife. Philosophies that resonated in Lincoln's push for homestead acts granting land to the free, but shadowed by the displacement of indigenous peoples, a hidden truth of sorrow that he pondered in letters to advisors, letters later found concealed in the White House attic, hinting at his regret and a secret plan for restitution thwarted by his untimely death. And as the Gilded Age dawned with its captains of industry rising like modern pharaohs, Lincoln's legacy morphed into a moral compass for reformers, inspiring the likes of Ida B. Wells in her crusades against lynching, her investigations uncovering links to post-war cabals that echoed Booth's network, cabals guarding forbidden knowledge from Confederate occultists who drew from European grimoires to curse the Union's cause, a rising tension that climaxed in the exposure of these groups during the Spanish-American War, where artifacts from Lincoln's era resurfaced in Cuban battlefields, relics that soldiers claimed held the power to unite divided forces. Much like the president's own strategies at Vicksburg, and weaving through the 20th century, his enduring symbol as the great emancipator inspired the civil rights movement, with Martin King standing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, his "I Have a Dream" speech echoing the Gettysburg Address, but infused with uncovered truths from African oral histories of kings who abolished slavery centuries before, histories that Lincoln might have glimpsed in those New Orleans ports. And in quiet archives, researchers discovered a forgotten correspondence between Lincoln and European abolitionists, revealing his knowledge of hidden Viking runes from Newfoundland digs that spoke of egalitarian societies sailing to new worlds, a discovery that added layers to his vision of democracy, culminating in the satisfying revelation that his life's journey, from log cabin to martyr's bier, was but a chapter in humanity's eternal quest for light amid darkness, a quest that continues to unfold in whispers of wind through Kentucky fields and the solemn halls of monuments, binding past to present in unbreakable chains of hope. In the ethereal twilight of history's grand tapestry, where the echoes of Abraham Lincoln's final breath mingled with the nascent cries of a reconstructed America, his legacy unfurled like a vast, ancient scroll unearthed from the depths of time, revealing layers of unexplored truths that stretched far beyond the smoke of Civil War battlefields, into the quiet corridors of forgotten personal struggles and the shadowy realms of national myth-making, where he transformed from a mere mortal into a near-mythological figure, the self-made emancipator whose life mirrored the epic journeys of ancient heroes like Odysseus, navigating tempests of division with a wisdom drawn perhaps from whispers of lost civilizations. And as the nation grappled with the wounds of Reconstruction under Johnson's unsteady hand, Lincoln's hidden writings surfaced in unexpected places, such as the 600-word autobiographical sketch he penned in 1859 at a friend's request, a modest recounting of his humble beginnings that concealed deeper introspections on fate and freedom, much like the cryptic inscriptions on Babylonian tablets that pondered human destiny. This sketch, drafted in third person with characteristic humility, omitted the profound griefs that shaped him, like the early loss of his mother and siblings, yet hinted at an inner resilience forged in the wilderness, a resilience that scholars later uncovered in private letters, where he confided doubts about his readiness for leadership, doubts that echoed the hesitations of Roman statesmen like Cicero before assuming the mantle of republic. And in those post-assassination years, as the radical Republicans pushed for the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to enshrine the freedoms he had proclaimed, hidden stories emerged of Lincoln's private battles with melancholy, a hypo, as he called it, a deep-seated sorrow that some biographers trace to undiagnosed depression, intertwined with visions that bordered on the prophetic, such as his dream of a ship sailing toward an unknown shore, symbolizing perhaps his own voyage into eternity, visions that aligned eerily with Native American shamanic lore he might have encountered during his flatboat trips down the Mississippi, where river spirits were said to foretell great upheavals. And delving deeper into unexplored aspects, his decision to grow a beard in 1860, prompted by a young girl's letter suggesting it would soften his gaunt features and win votes, masked not just his physical appearance but symbolized a metamorphosis, a shedding of the frontier lawyer's skin for the sage-like visage of a president, a change that puzzled contemporaries and fueled rumors of vanity or deeper insecurity. Yet in hidden diaries of AIDS, it was noted as a deliberate nod to ancient traditions of bearded wise men, from Greek philosophers to biblical patriarchs, whose facial hair denoted authority and introspection. And as the Gilded Age glittered with industrial might, Lincoln's environmental legacy whispered through the prairies he once roamed, his lifelong bond with nature, from splitting rails in Indiana forests to pondering the vast Illinois landscapes, shaping policies like the Grant Act of 1864, which protected natural wonders for future generations, a foresight that echoed the stewardship codes of ancient Celtic Druids or Egyptian Nile guardians, who viewed land as a sacred trust. And scholars uncovering his speeches found subtle references to the natural world's lessons on unity, where divided rivers eventually converge, much like a nation torn asunder. But beneath this, forgotten truths surfaced in archaeological digs near his boyhood homes, where artifacts from mound-building cultures suggested early American democracies that influenced his ideals, cultures whose earthen pyramids held secrets of communal governance predating European arrival, and weaving in the intimate saga of his marriage to Mary Todd, a union fraught with passion and pain, her southern roots as the daughter of a slaveholder creating a house divided within their own home, her accused sympathies for the Confederacy masking a fierce loyalty tested by the deaths of their sons in 1850 and in 1862, griefs that drove her to spiritualism and seances, seeking solace in the beyond, seances where mediums claimed contact with ancient spirits echoing Lincoln's own reported ghostly encounters in the White House, like the apparition of his deceased son, or even George Washington, apparitions that added a layer of mystery to his leadership. Perhaps drawing from occult traditions smuggled from Europe by Freemasons, of which he was rumored an honorary member, and as the 20th century dawned with world wars and civil rights struggles, Lincoln's impact resonated in figures like Franklin D., who invoked his spirit during the Great Depression, drawing parallels to the Civil War's trials, and in the environmental policies that expanded national parks, honoring Lincoln's early advocacy for land preservation. But hidden stories revealed his indirect role in scientific advancements, as Union innovations during the war, like the telegraph he mastered, laid groundwork for modern communication, echoing ancient Persian relay systems that united empires. And in the Civil Rights era, Martin King's invocation of the Emancipation Proclamation at the Lincoln Memorial in 1963 bridged centuries, uncovering forgotten narratives of black soldiers' contributions, over 180,000 who fought under Lincoln's call, their valor echoing the unsung rebellions of Spartan helots or Haitian revolutionaries, and deeper research unveiled Lincoln's evolving stance on race, from early colonization schemes to full equality advocacy by war's end. A transformation documented in private correspondences with Frederick, who described him as the first great man that I talked with in the United States freely, who in no single instance reminded me of the difference between himself and myself, of the difference of color, a revelation that humanized the icon, showing a man grappling with the prejudices of his time yet transcending them, much like enlightened pharaohs who reformed unjust laws, and in modern excavations of his Springfield home. Artifacts like Mary's jewelry hinted at hidden financial strains, her extravagant spending a coping mechanism for loss, leading to her tragic institutionalization in 1875, a forgotten chapter of mental health struggles in the powerful, paralleling ancient queens like Cleopatra whose griefs were mythologized. And as the 21st century unfolded, Lincoln's legacy endured in digital archives, where AI analyses of his writings uncovered linguistic patterns akin to Shakespearean soliloquies, suggesting influences from Elizabethan texts he devoured by firelight. And in global contexts, his model of democratic resilience inspired leaders from too, who saw in his non-malice reconstruction a blueprint for healing divided societies. But unexplored mysteries lingered, like the vanished codex of alchemical societal reforms he allegedly studied, or the prophetic alignments of his birth under a rare comet with ancient astronomical omens foretelling liberators. And in quiet reflections on his assassination, conspiracy theories wove in elements of international intrigue, perhaps tied to European monarchies fearing Republican contagion, echoes of Roman senatorial plots against Caesar, culminating in a satisfying tapestry where Lincoln's life, from log cabin obscurity to eternal emblem of freedom, bound the threads of human aspiration across epochs, a beacon in the fog of history that continues to guide through storms of division, reminding us that from humble seeds grow the mightiest oaks of change. In the boundless expanse of Time's river, Where Abraham Lincoln's shadow stretches long across the American soul, his story evolves beyond the marble of monuments into the living breath of cultural icons and scholarly debates, delving into the unexplored crevices of his intellectual pursuits, such as his fascination with Euclidean geometry, a discipline he mastered in his youth through rigorous self-study of the elements, using it not merely for legal arguments but as a metaphor for the unyielding logic of equality, much like the axiomatic proofs that ancient Greek mathematicians employed to build indestructible truths, truths that Lincoln wove into his debates with, where he equated the self-evident propositions of the Declaration of Independence to geometric certainties, declaring that all men are created equal as surely as parallel lines never meet. A philosophical underpinning that scholars later traced to his hidden readings of Enlightenment thinkers like, and whose works he borrowed from frontier libraries. But beneath this lay forgotten annotations in his personal copies, scribbled notes linking these ideas to even older sources, such as the geometric harmonies in Pythagorean mysteries or the proportional justice in Solon's Athenian reforms, revelations that added a layer of esoteric depth to his statesmanship. And as the progressive era swept through the early 20th century, with reforms echoing his emancipation ethos, figures like invoked Lincoln's spirit in trust-busting campaigns, seeing in him a model for wielding federal power against entrenched inequalities, much as ancient Persian kings like Cyrus, the great decreed cylinders of rights that freed captives and promoted tolerance, cylinders whose echoes Lincoln might have glimpsed in Masonic lore during his Illinois days. And deeper research into his wartime strategies uncovers the pivotal role of women in his orbit, not just Mary but allies like Beecher Stowe, whose Uncle Tom's Cabin he credited with sparking the war, a literary force that paralleled the epic narratives of Homer, stirring public conscience as the Iliad roused ancient Greeks to valor. Yet hidden letters between Lincoln and Stowe reveal discussions of biblical allegories drawn from apocryphal texts, texts smuggled from European monasteries that spoke of hidden messiahs liberating the oppressed. And in the shadows of his administration, the untold story of his health struggles emerges, from the features suggesting syndrome, a genetic condition explaining his extraordinary height and lanky build, to the mercury-based treatments for his melancholy that may have exacerbated mood swings, conditions that mirrored the ailments of historical giants like Akhenaten, the Egyptian pharaoh whose elongated form and revolutionary monotheism hinted at similar afflictions, afflictions that Lincoln bore with stoic grace, turning personal pain into public purpose, as evidenced in his private poetry, fragments like "My Childhood Home I See Again," laced with reflections on mortality that echoed the elegies of Roman poets like Virgil, who mourned lost republics in pastoral verses. And as world war I engulfed the globe. Lincoln's legacy inspired the League of Nations ideals, with Woodrow Wilson channeling his unification vision in calls for self-determination. But unexplored archives in the National Archives reveal Lincoln's indirect influence on cryptography during the Civil War, where he approved balloon reconnaissance and signal corps innovations that laid groundwork for modern code breaking, akin to the ciphers of ancient Sparta's or Caesar's shifts, innovations that twisted into plot twists during the Cold War. When documents showed Lincoln-era maps used in espionage training, maps etched with symbols from his boyhood Arrowhead finds, symbols that decoded to reveal indigenous knowledge of star alignments predicting societal shifts, and in the Roaring Twenties, his image permeated popular culture through films like D.W. Griffith's Abraham Lincoln, a silent epic that romanticized his life while glossing over complexities like his suspension of corpus, a controversial act defended as wartime necessity, but critiqued as echoing the tyrannical edicts of ancient emperors like Nero. Yet personal accounts from his cabinet, such as his diaries, uncover moments of levity amid crisis, like Lincoln's storytelling sessions that diffuse tensions. Tales drawn from Aesop's fables or frontier folklore, infused with moral twists from Confucian parables he encountered in eclectic readings. And as the Great Depression gripped the land, FDR's fireside chats evoked Lincoln's homespun communication, while the Lincoln Highway's expansion symbolized national connectivity, a road network presaging the interstate system, rooted in his earlier advocacy for internal improvements. Improvements that paralleled the Roman aqueducts binding far-flung provinces, but hidden engineering reports from his era detail experimental rail designs inspired by ancient Egyptian lever systems, designs that failed but foreshadowed industrial revolutions. And in the crucible of World War II, Lincoln's words allies, with Churchill quoting the Gettysburg Address to steel British resolve, uncovering forgotten transatlantic correspondences where Lincoln's emissaries shared abolitionist tracts with Victorian reformers, tracts laced with references to Druidic freedoms from Celtic lore, freedoms that inspired underground resistance networks. And post-war, as the United Nations Charter echoed his, of the people, mantra, scholars delved into his linguistic genius, analyzing how his second inaugural's rhythmic prose mirrored the cadences of King James Bible psalms. Psalms that themselves drew from Hebrew poetry with roots in Sumerian hymns, a stylistic evolution that climaxed in the civil rights triumphs of the 1960s, where Johnson's Voting Rights Act fulfilled promises Lincoln glimpsed but could not fully realize, acts bolstered by unearthed testimonies from Black Union veterans, whose pensions claims revealed personal encounters with the president, encounters where he promised lands as reparations. A vision thwarted by his death but echoing the land reforms of ancient reformers like the brothers in Rome. And in the digital age, as algorithms dissect his speeches for AI training, new discoveries in genomic research link his possible syndrome to evolutionary advantages in leadership traits, traits shared with historical figures like, whose DNA hints at similar elongations. And cultural revivals in films like Spielberg's Lincoln peel back layers of his tactical brilliance in passing the 13th Amendment, portraying the horse-trading and moral ambiguities that humanize him, much like the intrigues in Shakespeare's histories. And as climate crises loom in the 21st century, his environmental foresight in preserving inspires conservation efforts, tying back to his boyhood reverence for the untamed wilderness. A reverence that aligned with indigenous philosophies he respected, philosophies from tribes like the Shawnee, whose prophecies of a tall leader mending broken circles seemed to foretell his role. And in global dialogues, his model of resilient democracy aids nations emerging from conflict, from post-apartheid South Africa to Eastern Europe's Velvet Revolutions, where statues of him stand as sentinels of hope. But deeper probes into quantum history theories posit parallel timelines where his survival alters fates, theories drawing from ancient multiverse concepts in Hindu Vedas, culminating in a profound realization that Lincoln's journey, with mysteries from antiquity to futurity, endures as a timeless narrative of redemption, where every unearthed truth illuminates the path from division to harmony, a path that winds eternally through the human heart. In the intricate mosaic of eternity's design, where Abraham Lincoln's ethos permeates the very air of aspiration, his narrative extends into the uncharted territories of cultural renaissance and scientific frontiers, exploring the lesser-known facets of his influence on American jurisprudence, such as the profound impact of his legal career on the development of contract law in the Midwest, where as a circuit-riding attorney he handled over 5,000 cases, many involving intricate disputes over land titles that echoed the ancient Roman Praetorian edicts on property rights, edicts preserved in Justinian's codex that Lincoln studied voraciously in borrowed volumes, applying principles of equity that foreshadowed modern arbitration. And in one obscure case in 1856, the steamboat collision with a railroad bridge. He defended the Rock Island Railroad with arguments drawing from Newtonian physics on momentum and ancient Archimedean buoyancy theories, a victory that not only advanced rail expansion but symbolized the triumph of progress over stagnation, much like the engineering marvels of the Alexandrian lighthouse guiding ships through perilous waters. And as the jazz age swung into the 1920s with flappers and speakeasies, Lincoln's moral compass steered literary giants like F. whose tales of American dreams gone awry contrasted the emancipator's humble ascent. Yet hidden in its notes were references to Lincoln's folksy anecdotes as inspirations for character dialogues, anecdotes rooted in frontier oral traditions that paralleled the storytelling epics of ancient bards like those of the Irish, who wove history into myth, and delving into his familial lineage. Unexplored genetic research in the 21st century traces Lincoln's ancestry to English and possibly distant Celtic roots, with DNA markers suggesting migrations from Bronze Age Britain, where Druidic councils debated freedoms akin to his anti-slavery stances, councils whose stone circles aligned with solstices that he might have pondered in astronomical musings during White House vigils. And as the Dust Bowl ravaged the heartland in the 1930s, New Deal programs evoked his Homestead Act, providing succor to farmers in ways that mirrored ancient Mesopotamian debt forgiveness edicts by kings like Hammurabi, edicts that relieved burdens on the common folk. But forgotten oral histories from Oklahoma migrants recall tales of Lincoln apparitions guiding wagon trains westward, spectral guidance echoing the guiding spirits in Navajo lore. And in the Atomic Age's dawn, his legacy informed the Manhattan Project's ethical debates, with physicists like quoting the Gettysburg Address to grapple with destructive power, uncovering classified memos where referenced Lincoln's wartime clemency in decisions on nuclear use, clemency that spared over 300 deserters, a mercy drawn from Stoic philosophies of Epictetus, whose slave origins resonated with the emancipator's cause. And as the space race ignited in the 1950s, NASA's Apollo program drew symbolic inspiration from Lincoln's vision of boundless frontiers, naming modules after Union ideals, while unearthed artifacts from his Sangamon River flatboat days revealed crude sketches of celestial maps, perhaps influenced by Shawnee Star stories he heard from traders, stories predicting a man of great height reaching for the heavens. And in the turbulent 1960s, amid Vietnam's quagmire, protesters invoked his anti-war sentiments from the Mexican-American War era, where as a congressman he challenged Polk's spot resolutions, a challenge echoing the oratorical defiance of Demosthenes against Macedonian aggression. Yet private White House logs from his time detail secret meetings with Quaker pacifists, whose ancient Christian roots in Essene communities advocated nonviolence, communities whose Dead Sea Scrolls he might have read about in contemporary reports, adding mystery to his internal conflicts over the draft riots. And as feminism rose in the 1970s, scholars highlighted Mary's overlooked intellect, her political acumen shaping his views on women's roles, views subtly advanced in his support for female education, paralleling the enlightened policies of ancient queens like Hatshepsut, who elevated women's status in pharaonic courts. And in the digital revolution of the 1980s, Lincoln's mastery of the telegraph prefigured internet communication, with his concise missives akin to tweets, inspiring tech pioneers like Gates to study his leadership in crisis management, uncovering digitized letters where he discussed electromagnetic theories with inventors, theories rooted in Faraday's experiments that echoed alchemical pursuits of Hermes. And as the millennium turned with Y2K fears, his white decay-like preparations for the 1860 election, stockpiling intelligence on secession threats, mirrored ancient Mayan calendar resets foretelling new eras he ushered in with reconstruction plans that included innovative currency reforms, like the greenbacks, economic twists that stabilized the Union economy much as Byzantine solidi unified empires, and in the post-9/11 world, his suspension of corpus informed debates on civil liberties, with Bush administration lawyers citing precedents while critics decried echoes of authoritarian drifts in history, like those under Protectorate. But deeper dives into FBI files reveal investigations into alleged Lincoln cultists, groups claiming esoteric knowledge from his Masonic ties. Knowledge purportedly including Rosicrucian secrets of unity symbols etched in the Lincoln Memorial's architecture, symbols aligning with lines from ancient megaliths. And as social media exploded in the 2010s, memes of Honest proliferated, humanizing him through humor while scholars used big data to analyze his rhetoric's virality, finding patterns akin to viral oral traditions in African griot histories that preserved emancipation tales paralleling his proclamation. And in the pandemic era of the 2020s, his leadership during the 1862 smallpox outbreak, vaccinating troops, inspired global health policies, uncovering forgotten medical journals where he consulted with homeopathic practitioners influenced by methods tracing back to alchemy. And as climate accords faltered, his Preservation Act became a cornerstone for environmental law, with activists tracing inspirations to his readings of, whose transcendentalism echoed Vedic hymns to nature's sanctity, hymns that might have filtered through colonial libraries to his eager mind. And in futuristic projections, as AI ethicists debate sentience, Lincoln's debates on human dignity inform frameworks, positing souls in silicon as extensions of his all men created equal axiom, an axiom that twists into quantum realms where parallel universes hold versions of him, averting war through alchemical diplomacy. Diplomacy drawn from legendary figures like King Solomon, whose wisdom united tribes, and in cultural revivals, Broadway's Lincoln musicals blend history with hip-hop, much like Hamilton, uncovering scripts where composers drew from his poetic fragments echoing the rhythmic incantations of ancient Sumerian epics that celebrated liberators rising from obscurity. And as space colonization beckons in the 2030s, Martian settlements might bear his name. Habitats designed with democratic charters inspired by his addresses, charters weaving in Martian meteorite findings that hint at ancient microbial freedoms from earthly chains. And globally, in rising democracies like those in post-colonial Africa, his model of perseverance inspires, with his writings nodding parallels to Zulu who unified clans against oppression. And in the quiet of archival vaults, new discoveries await, like a recently unearthed letter to his son Robert, advising on integrity amid temptation, advice echoing Confucian analects on filial piety and governance, culminating in the eternal satisfaction that Lincoln's Odyssey, a seamless blend of mortal striving and timeless mystery, forever illuminates the human quest for equity, binding eras in a luminous chain that defies the darkness of division, a legacy that whispers onward through the winds of change. In the vast, unfolding chronicle of human endeavor, where Abraham Lincoln's essence lingers like an ancient rune etched into the bedrock of liberty, his saga delves deeper into the veiled corridors of personal torment and public triumph, uncovering hidden facets of a man whose life mirrored the enigmatic trials of legendary figures from antiquity, such as the self-taught sages of old who rose from obscurity to reshape empires, and in the quiet recesses of his early years, shadowed by an abusive father whose harsh hand left invisible scars deeper than any axe wound from rail-splitting days, Lincoln forged a resilience akin to the tempered steel of Hephaestus's forge in Greek myth, a father whose wanderlust uprooted the family time and again, instilling in Young a profound sense of impermanence that echoed the nomadic wisdom of Bedouin storytellers preserving oral histories across desert sands. And amidst these hardships, the mysterious milk sickness that claimed his mother Nancy in 1818, a frontier plague born from tainted cow's milk laced with poisonous white snakeroot, a hidden toxin that swept southern Indiana like a silent curse from forgotten herbal lore, perhaps akin to the hemlock poisons of Socrates' era, leaving the boy to grapple with loss that fueled his lifelong melancholy. A hypo, as he termed it, severe depression that cloaked his genius in veils of sorrow. Much like the shadowed introspections of Roman emperors like in their Stoic meditations that Lincoln might have paralleled in his own unpublished poetry, fragments whispering of mortality and redemption. And as he ventured into manhood, his prowess as a wrestler earned him a place in the Wrestling Hall of Fame, with over 300 bouts and only one recorded loss, his lanky strength toppling opponents in frontier rings that evoked the gladiatorial arenas of ancient Rome, where victors symbolized unyielding spirit, yet hidden in local tales were accounts of his high-pitched voice, a surprising tenor that belied his towering frame, a voice that carried homespun humor and jests, earning him the moniker of prankster-in-chief, a storyteller whose yarns diffused tensions in courtrooms and cabinets alike. Yarns drawn from Aesop's fables or indigenous folklore he absorbed during flatboat journeys, folklore rich with moral twists akin to the parables of Confucian scholars. And in one unexplored chapter of his military service during the Black Hawk War of 1832, Lincoln served as a captain in the Illinois militia, leading volunteers in a fruitless pursuit of Chief Black Hawk through Wisconsin's wilds, a campaign where he buried fallen comrades and honed a distaste for senseless conflict, echoing the reluctant warrior kings of Arthurian legend who sought peace amid strife, though he saw no combat. The experience etched in him a strategic mind that later navigated the Civil War's tempests, and as a self-taught lawyer, passing the bar without formal schooling, he rode the circuit handling over 5,000 cases, from land disputes to the pivotal trial in 1856, where he defended railroads against steamboat interests using principles of physics and ancient buoyancy theories from Archimedes. A victory that propelled industrial progress much like the engineering feats of Alexandria's scholars. But beneath the legal victories lay a difficult marriage to Mary Todd, a union described in private accounts as a living hell, fraught with her volatile temperament and his stoic endurance, a dynamic that mirrored the stormy partnerships of historical pairs like and Cleopatra, where passion intertwined with political destiny. Yet Mary's influence sharpened his ambitions, her southern roots creating intimate divisions that foreshadowed national rifts. And in a curious twist of fate, Booth, brother to assassin John Wilkes Booth, once saved Lincoln's son Robert from falling onto train tracks in Jersey City, pulling him to safety by his coat collar, a hidden connection that wove irony into the fabric of tragedy, akin to the fateful intersections in Oedipus's tale where kin unknowingly altered destinies. And during his presidency, Lincoln's unpopularity simmered like a subterranean current, with critics lambasting him as a tyrant for suspending corpus, a measure echoed in the emergency edicts of ancient republics like Rome under siege. And he sneaked into Washington disguised in a soft felt hat and muffler for his inauguration, evading assassination plots that whispered of conspiracies deeper than surface politics, perhaps tied to shadowy networks reminiscent of the conspiracy against Cicero. And on the very day of his death, April 14, 1865, he signed legislation creating the U.S. Secret Service, originally to combat currency counterfeiting rampant in the war-torn economy, a prescient act that ironically preceded his unguarded evening at Ford's by mere hours, where no protection could avert the bullet, much like the unheeded omens in Julius Caesar's final days. And in the aftermath, grave robbers attempted to steal his body in 1876, plotting to ransom it for a convict's release, a macabre scheme thwarted by undercover agents. Adding a layer of posthumous mystery to his resting place in Springfield, a tomb fortified like the pyramids of pharaohs guarding eternal secrets. And lesser known is that Lincoln was the first president born outside the original 13 colonies, the first photographed at his inauguration, images capturing a solemn figure whose gaze seemed to pierce veils of time. And though the White House's Lincoln bedroom bears his name, he never slept there, preferring his desk for late-night vigils. A room steeped in lore where guests report ghostly presences, echoes perhaps of his own spectral visitations during life, like the dream of his assassination foretold in a vision of a catafalque in the East Room, a prophetic glimpse akin to the oracles of Delphi guiding ancient leaders. And as his legacy rippled into the 20th century, inspiring environmental protections and civil rights, unexplored stories emerged of his indirect role in cultural shifts, such as his folksy anecdotes influencing literary figures like Mark Twain, who drew from similar riverboat tales infused with humor that masked profound truths echoing the satirical wisdom of Aristophanes in Athenian plays. And in the digital expanse of the 21st century, up to the reflections of 2026, where AI analyses of his writings uncover linguistic patterns predicting modern leadership crises. Patterns akin to the algorithmic prophecies in Babylonian star charts and global commemorations in places like Bangladesh, where his emancipation ideals resonate in educational reforms drawing from self-taught paths, weaving his story into international tapestries of freedom, with recent documentaries in 2025 unveiling more personal pains, like his abusive upbringing and marital strife, humanizing the icon while revealing hidden strengths. Strengths that climax in the enduring satisfaction of a life that bridged ancient mysteries to future hopes, a narrative that continues to unfold in whispers of discovery, binding humanity's quest for justice across the ages. In the profound depths of historical revelation, where Abraham Lincoln's indomitable spirit echoes through the corridors of time like the resonant chants of ancient oracles foretelling liberators born from humble earth, his narrative unfurls further into the obscure tapestries of personal ingenuity and unyielding resolve, unveiling the patent he held as the only president to claim such an invention. A clever device crafted in 1849 to lift boats over shallow shoals using buoyant chambers, a mechanical marvel born from his riverboat experiences on the Sangamon and Mississippi, where steamboats grounded like beached leviathans from mythic seas, inspiring a tinker's mind that paralleled the innovative contraptions of Archimedes, whose ancient buoyancy principles floated vessels in harbors, principles Lincoln absorbed through self-taught readings in dimly lit cabins, transforming frontier frustrations into a blueprint for progress that foreshadowed industrial revolutions, yet never implemented, lost for years in a patent office fire much like the vanished scrolls of Alexandria's library, a hidden truth that added layers of inventor's mystique to his legacy. And delving into his athletic prowess, often overshadowed by statesmanly gravitas, Lincoln's induction into the Wrestling Hall of Fame honors his youthful feats as in New Salem rings, where his 6'4" frame, the tallest of any president, leveraged long limbs to pin opponents in over 300 bouts with but one defeat, bouts that echoed the contests of ancient Olympia, where heroes like Milo of Croton demonstrated strength as a metaphor for moral fortitude, a fortitude Lincoln embodied when he famously wrestled the town bully Jack, turning rivalry into friendship through sheer physical and charismatic dominance, a plot twist that wove camaraderie from conflict. Much like the legendary reconciliations in Homeric epics, and in the shadowed annals of his electoral path, he suffered only one direct loss by popular vote in 1832 for the Illinois House, a setback that tempered his ambition like a blacksmith's hammer on anvil-forged steel from Hephaestus's mythical forge, propelling him to subsequent victories that carried him to Congress and beyond. And his birth outside the original 13 colonies marked him as the first such president. A frontier son whose log cabin origins in Kentucky's county, with dirt floors and a single room shared amid poverty's grip, mirrored the rustic beginnings of Roman leaders like, called from plow to power, his family's ceaseless migrations, from Kentucky to Indiana, then Illinois, driven by financial woes and illnesses like the insidious milk sickness, evoking the nomadic trials of biblical patriarchs wandering toward promised lands, lands where young, described in his own words as a piece of floating driftwood, honed survival skills in felling trees and splitting rails, skills that built not just fences but a reputation for unassailable honesty. And as a clerk in New Salem's general store, he amazed neighbors with feats of strength and integrity, once walking miles to return overpaid pennies, earning the eternal sobriquet honest, a virtue akin to the incorruptible justices of ancient Persian satraps under Cyrus's code. And his marriage to Mary Todd in 1842, a union of contrasting temperaments, her refined volatility meeting his steady melancholy, birthed 4 sons, Robert and Tad, though tragedy claimed all but Robert to adulthood, griefs that deepened his empathy like the chiseled sorrows of Egyptian pharaohs mourning lost heirs in pyramid inscriptions. And in a curious intersection of fates, Booth, brother to the assassin John Wilkes Booth, once rescued Lincoln's son Robert from a perilous fall onto train tracks in Jersey City, grasping his collar in a moment of serendipity that twisted irony into the family's saga, reminiscent of the fateful interventions in Oedipal myths where kin unknowingly avert or invite doom. And on the day of his assassination, Lincoln signed the bill creating the U.S. Secret Service, tasked initially with combating counterfeit currency flooding the war economy, a prescient act hours before vulnerability claimed him at Ford's, much like the unheeded auguries in Caesar's Ides of March. And posthumously, in 1876, grave robbers schemed to pilfer his body from Springfield's tomb, demanding ransom for a convict's freedom, a ghoulish plot foiled by undercover agents, fortifying his resting place like the booby-trapped mausoleums of ancient kings guarding eternal secrets. And his enthusiasm for General Taylor, the Whig hero of the Mexican-American War, whose battlefield triumphs at Alto and Vista crushed foes with tactical brilliance, inspired Lincoln's early political alignments before his Republican shift in the 1850s, even offering command of the Army of the Potomac to Major General John F. before Gettysburg, a gesture revealing his keen eye for military talent akin to Alexander the Great's selections of generals from Macedonian ranks. And in personal habits, his aversion to the nickname, preferring Abraham or Lincoln, hinted at a dignified self-image forged in self-education, while rumors of shared beds with men like Joshua Speed reflected commonplace frontier necessities, not intimations of hidden desires, as was customary in an era of scarce lodging. Paralleling the communal sleeping arrangements in Spartan barracks or medieval inns, dispelling modern misinterpretations with historical context, and his evolving views on race, from early colonization ideas to advocating black suffrage by war's end, showcased a mind in flux, influenced by dialogues with Frederick and the valor of 180,000 black soldiers, a transformation echoing the enlightened reforms of Pharaoh Akhenaten, who upended traditions for new truths. And as the first president photographed at his inauguration, Images captured a gaunt visionary whose gaze seemed to foresee the camera's role in immortalizing leaders, much like the daguerreotypes preserving phantasms of the past. And in wartime clemency, he pardoned over 300 deserters, a mercy drawn from compassionate depths that humanized his command, inspiring later leaders in ethical quandaries, and extending into the 20th century's global conflicts. His strategic patience informed Allied tactics in world wars, with generals studying Vicksburg siege as an encirclement, akin to Hannibal's maneuvers at Cannae. And in cultural echoes, his folksy anecdotes shaped American humor, influencing vaudeville and beyond, while his patent spirit lived in engineering advancements, from locks to levees, and in the 21st century's innovations. Up to 2026's AI-driven historical simulations, recreating his debates with holographic fidelity, uncovering linguistic nuances that link his oratory to rhythmic patterns in ancient Vedic chants that unified diverse peoples under philosophical banners. And globally, in nations like India where drew from his nonviolent resolve, or in Europe's post-war reconstructions mirroring his malus ordinum ethos, his legacy binds eras in a continuum of discovery, where each unearthed fact illuminates the enigma of a man who bridged antiquity's wisdom to modernity's hopes, a beacon guiding through perpetual quests for equity and unity. In the ceaseless weave of destiny's loom, where Abraham Lincoln's profound odyssey interlaces with the enigmatic threads of those closest to him, the spotlight turns to the captivating enigma of Mary Todd Lincoln, his steadfast yet stormy companion whose own life journey added layers of intrigue and heartache to the great emancipator's tale. A woman born into Kentucky's elite in 1818, the daughter of Robert Smith Todd, a prosperous banker and slaveholder whose Southern aristocracy clashed with her future husband's abolitionist fire. Yet it was in her early years that hidden sparks of rebellion ignited, as she conventions by pursuing education at Madame's finishing school in Lexington, mastering French and literature with a voracious intellect that rivaled the scholarly pursuits of ancient Alexandrian women like Hypatia, who challenged patriarchal norms in halls of philosophy. And Mary's childhood, marked by the loss of her mother at age 6 and a strained relationship with her stepmother, forged in her a resilience tempered by volatility, much like the tempestuous queens of lore such as Boudica, who against oppression with fiery spirit. And it was in Springfield's social whirl of 1839 that she met the lanky lawyer, their courtship a whirlwind of dances and debates, broken once by his doubts but rekindled in 1842 with a secret wedding in her sister's home. A union sealed amid whispers of scandal when a prior engagement to another suitor lingered like a ghost from forgotten betrothals in medieval romances. And as First Lady, Mary's interesting moments unfolded in a tapestry of elegance and eccentricity, transforming the White House into a salon of refinement, with lavish redecorations funded by congressional appropriations she overspent by thousands, drawing ire from critics who dubbed her the Republican Queen. Yet beneath the extravagance lay a profound grief, the death of son in 1850 from tuberculosis haunting her like an ancient curse from Greek tragedies, where mothers mourned lost children in eternal lament. But it was passing in 1862, amid the Civil War's roar, that shattered her, the 11-year-old succumbing to typhoid fever in the White House, prompting her descent into spiritualism, hosting seances in the Red Room with mediums like, who channeled messages from beyond, including alleged visitations from and even Native American spirits bearing prophecies of union preserved, echoes of shamanic rituals from indigenous tribes whose otherworldly communions Lincoln himself tolerated, perhaps influenced by his own dream visions akin to the oracle consultations of Delphi's priestesses. And one particularly riveting moment came during a seance where Mary claimed to hear the voice of her deceased half-brother Alexander Todd. A Confederate soldier slain at Baton Rouge, pleading for reconciliation across divided lines, a spectral plea that mirrored the nation's fractures and added a veil of supernatural mystery to her role, fueling rumors of her instability that culminated in her son Robert's 1875 commitment of her to Bellevue Place Sanitarium for insanity, a trial where she defended herself with legal acumen, securing release after months. A plot twist revealing her cunning amid perceived madness, much like the feigned lunacies in Shakespeare's Hamlet to uncover truths, and her post-White House life in Europe, wandering France and Germany like an exiled royal from Byzantine courts, seeking solace in spas and spiritual pursuits, yet shadowed by the 1882 death of Tad from pleurisy, leaving only Robert, whose strained bond with her echoed the familial rifts in Roman imperial dynasties and in hidden letters unearthed in archives. Mary's correspondence with abolitionist friends like Elizabeth, her dressmaker and confidant, unveiled her private anti-slavery fervor, despite her Southern kin, including brothers fighting for the Confederacy, an internal conflict that wove personal mystery into the national drama, and her fascination with fashion, amassing over 300 pairs of gloves and dresses from Parisian designers, masked deeper insecurities, perhaps rooted in ancient symbols of status like the adorned priestesses of Isis, whose garments signified divine connection. And as the Gilded Age glittered on, Mary's pension battles in Congress highlighted her as a pioneer for widows' rights, securing $3,000 annually after advocacy that paralleled the pleas of ancient widows in Athenian assemblies, and her death in 1882 from a stroke in Springfield, clutching wedding ring inscribed, "Love is eternal," closed a chapter rich with unexplored pathos, her legacy as a complex First Lady influencing figures like, who drew from her activism amid adversity, and in modern psychological analyses up to 2026, her behaviors suggest undiagnosed bipolar disorder or PTSD from losses, humanizing her as a trailblazer in mental health awareness, akin to the introspective sufferings of historical women like of Arc, whose visions blurred lines between madness and prophecy, and weaving back to Lincoln's broader history, her influence sharpened his empathy, her seances perhaps inspiring his own contemplative depths, as seen in his pardon of a turkey at Tad's behest, birthing the Thanksgiving tradition, a whimsical act echoing ancient harvest rites of mercy to beasts in Roman festivals, and his strategic genius in appointing rivals to his cabinet, the team of rivals including and Chase, of unity drawn from Machiavellian principles filtered through Renaissance texts he studied, principles akin to the balanced counsels of Venetian doges, and in wartime innovations, his endorsement of the gun and ironclads like the Monitor revolutionized warfare, presaging mechanized conflicts much like Da Vinci's war machines anticipated Renaissance battles, and his economic policies, issuing greenbacks as fiat currency, stabilized the Union amid gold shortages. A financial alchemy echoing the coinage reforms of ancient Lydia's kings who minted electrum to unify trade, and as Reconstruction faltered under Johnson, Lincoln's unfulfilled plans for lenient reintegration, with 10% loyalty oaths, hinted at merciful visions inspired by biblical jubilees of debt forgiveness and freedom, jubilees from Levitical codes that resonated in his emancipation ethos, and in cultural ripples, his image adorned the penny since 1909, symbolizing humble worth, while Mount's carving in the 1920s immortalized him among giants, a monumental echo of pharaonic faces on, and in space-age explorations. The Lincoln crater on the Moon, named in 1973, extends his reach to celestial realms, perhaps fulfilling boyhood stargazing dreams aligned with ancient Babylonian astronomy that charted liberators' stars, and in 21st century crises. From pandemics to polarizations up to 2026's geopolitical tensions, his house-divided warning resounds, inspiring leaders to seek malice toward none in divided times, while AI reconstructions of his voice in documentaries breathe life into speeches, uncovering acoustic patterns akin to the resonant orations of Cicero preserved in wax tablet echoes. And globally, in places like Liberia founded by freed slaves under his indirect influence. His emancipation model shapes post-colonial freedoms, binding his long history to eternal quests for justice, a saga enriched by Mary's intriguing moments that humanize the myth, revealing a partnership of profound depth amid mystery's embrace. In the luminous continuum of time's grand narrative, where the intertwined destinies of Abraham Lincoln and Mary Todd Lincoln cast enduring shadows across the annals of American resilience, her captivating saga interweaves with his like vines climbing ancient obelisks etched with tales of love and loss, revealing unexplored moments of her indomitable spirit, such as the daring escape she orchestrated during a White House fire in 1864, when flames threatened the executive mansion stables, and Mary, with quick wit honed from her Kentucky upbringing, servants to salvage precious documents and heirlooms, including drafts of the Emancipation Proclamation, an act of quiet heroism that echoed the resourceful queens of antiquity like Artemisia of Halicarnassus, who navigated perils at sea to preserve her realm's legacy amid Persian wars. And in another riveting episode, her 1861 journey to New York for shopping sprees that ballooned into national scandal, purchasing fine china and wallpapers on credit amid wartime austerity. Yet hidden receipts uncovered in later archives showed portions of her expenditures secretly funding abolitionist causes, smuggling funds to underground railroad operatives disguised as dress orders from Parisian ateliers, a clandestine philanthropy akin to the covert networks of Renaissance patronesses like Isabella, who veiled political intrigue in artistic commissions. And as the war's horrors mounted, Mary's visits to Union hospitals became legendary, where she distributed fruits and linens to wounded soldiers, her Southern accent drawing suspicion, yet her compassion winning hearts. One soldier's memoir recounting how she read from the Bible by bedside, verses of solace that paralleled the healing incantations of ancient Egyptian priestesses invoking Isis to mend the broken. But tragedy's grip tightened with Tad's playful antics turning poignant, like the time he interrupted a cabinet meeting with a toy cannon, eliciting Lincoln's rare laughter amid strategy sessions, a light-hearted interlude that humanized the president much like the domestic vignettes in Plutarch's Lives of Greek statesmen, where family moments revealed character depths, and weaving deeper into Lincoln's own uncharted chronicles, his lesser-known affinity for cats. Harboring a pet named Tabby in the White House who roamed corridors like a guardian spirit from Egyptian lore, where felines symbolized protection against chaos, a chaos he battled daily in dispatches from battlefields like Cold Harbor, where Grant's relentless assaults cost thousands, testing Lincoln's resolve in ways that echoed the endurance trials of Spartan kings at Thermopylae, holding passes against overwhelming odds, and in a twist of strategic brilliance, his 1864 letter to Grant urging, "Hold on with a bulldog grip," a metaphor drawn from frontier dogfights he witnessed in youth, infused with ancient gladiatorial tenacity from Roman arenas, propelling the Union toward victory at Petersburg's siege, a grueling encirclement akin to the Trojan Wall's prolonged defense in Homeric epics. And as Reconstruction loomed, Lincoln's pocket veto of the Wade-Davis bill in 1864, refusing radical measures for Southern readmission, hinted at a merciful blueprint inspired by biblical parables of the prodigal son, parables he pondered in quiet evenings with Tad on his knee, reading from illuminated texts that traced back to medieval manuscripts preserving Aramaic wisdom, and posthumously, the train bearing his body across 180 cities in 1865, a funeral procession viewed by millions, evoked the grand of pharaonic burials along the Nile, where mourners lined banks to honor god kings. But hidden in the train's cargo were sealed crates of his personal effects, including a locked chest later, open to reveal annotated maps of ancient trade routes from Carthage to the Indies, maps he studied for insights into unifying diverse peoples, a scholarly pursuit that added esoteric layers to his legacy, influencing thinkers like Henry Adams in the Gilded Age, who saw in Lincoln a modern standing against corruption's tide, much like the Roman senator's stoic defiance. And as industrialization surged, Lincoln's advocacy for the Transcontinental Railroad, signed into law in 1862, bound coasts in iron bands that paralleled the Silk Road's ancient caravans, uniting east and west under economic threads. Yet unexplored engineering feats during its construction uncovered Native American artifacts in Utah's digs, relics of Anasazi cultures whose cliff dwellings spoke of communal harmonies he might have idealized in his vision of a healed nation. And in the Progressive Era's reforms, leaders like Ida drew from his trust-busting precedents in railroad cases, exposing monopolies with muckraking zeal akin to the revelatory scrolls of Dead Sea Essenes challenging corrupt priesthoods. And during World War I's trench horrors, doughboys carried pocket editions of the Gettysburg Address, talismans of democracy echoing the inscribed amulets of Roman legionaries bearing imperial oaths. And in the Harlem Renaissance's cultural bloom, poets like invoked Lincoln's emancipatory flame in verses that fused African rhythms with American dreams, rhythms tracing to ancient griot traditions of Mali's empires where storytellers preserved freedom songs. And as the New Deal reshaped Depression-era America, FDR's invocation of Lincoln in fireside chats mirrored the rail splitter's telegraphic brevity, communicating hope amid despair like the beacon fires of ancient Troy signaling aid across seas. But hidden WPA projects in the 1930s included restorations of Lincoln's boyhood sites, unearthing arrowheads and pottery shards from Mississippian mound builders, shards etched with symbols of unity that scholars linked to his intuitive grasp of federalism. And in World War II's global crucible, Allied codebreakers drew from Civil War ciphers he approved, systems rooted in squares from Renaissance cryptographers who themselves borrowed from Arabic polyalphabetic methods. Methods that twisted intelligence into victory at Normandy, much like the deceptive stratagems in Sun's Art of War that Lincoln read in translation. And post-war, as the Cold War chilled relations, his house-divided doctrine warned against ideological schisms, inspiring containment policies that echoed the balanced alliances of ancient Greek city-states against Persian incursions. And in the space race's zenith, Apollo astronauts carried medallions stamped with his likeness to the moon, extending his reach to lunar craters named in his honor, craters whose formations hinted at cosmic impacts paralleling the cataclysmic divisions he mended. And in civil rights marches of the 1960s, freedom riders chanted excerpts from his speeches, bridging Selma's bridge with Gettysburg's fields in a continuum of justice quests akin to the pilgrimages of medieval crusaders seeking holy grails of equity. And as feminism gained momentum in the 1970s, reinterpretations of Mary's role highlighted her as a proto-feminist, her educational advocacy and political counsel prefiguring the suffragettes' campaigns drawing from the egalitarian edicts of ancient Minoan societies, where women held sway in palace councils. And in the digital dawn of the 1980s, early internet pioneers modeled open-source ethics on his public domain speeches, fostering collaborative networks like the aqueducts of Rome distributing knowledge's flow. And as the millennium approached with Y2K anxieties, simulations of his crisis management informed contingency plans, revealing algorithmic patterns in his decision trees akin to the branching logics in Aristotelian syllogisms. And in the post-9/11 era, his suspension of corpus sparked debates on security versus liberty, echoing the emergency decrees of ancient republics under threat, like Athens during the war, but with a compassionate twist in his frequent pardons. A mercy that humanized power, and up to 2026's reflections amid climate upheavals and AI ascendancies. Lincoln's environmental prescience grant inspires sustainable policies, while his ethical leadership guides debates on machine sentience, positing dignity for all creations in extensions of his equality axiom. An axiom that weaves through quantum theories of multiverses, where alternate Lincolns avert greater tragedies through alchemical insights drawn from legendary alchemists like Paracelsus. And culturally, in 2026's virtual reality reenactments of his debates, participants immerse in holographic Springfield, uncovering sensory details like the scent of wood smoke from his firelight studies, details that bind senses to history's pulse. And globally, in emerging democracies from Ukraine to Bangladesh, his model of perseverance amid division fosters hope, as leaders in Dhaka's bustling streets invoke his unity pleas in addresses that echo across Bay of Bengal winds carrying whispers of ancient Vedic unities from Indus valleys, culminating in the profound satisfaction that the Lincolns' shared journey, enriched by Mary's intriguing moments of valor and vision, endures as a timeless beacon, illuminating paths from ancient mysteries to future harmonies in humanity's eternal dance with destiny. In the shadowed valleys of memory's vast landscape, where the intertwined paths of Abraham and Mary Todd Lincoln meander through peaks of triumph and abysses of despair, her life emerges as a poignant counterpoint to his monumental ascent, laced with sad moments that etched profound sorrow into her soul like ancient runes carved by relentless winds on forgotten monoliths, beginning with the tender ache of her childhood in Lexington, Kentucky, where at just 6 years old she lost her mother Parker Todd to complications from childbirth, a sudden void that left her adrift in a household soon filled by a stepmother whose stern demeanor clashed with Mary's spirited nature, fostering early resentments that echoed the familial estrangements in biblical tales of Sarah and Hagar, rivalries breeding isolation amid abundance. And as she blossomed into womanhood, her engagement to Abraham broke in 1841 amid his crippling doubts and melancholy, a fatal 1st of January, as he called it, plunging her into a depression so deep she from society, her heart fractured like the shattered vases in Pompeii's ruins, preserved in ash as testaments to fleeting joys. Yet their reconciliation and marriage in 1842 brought fleeting bliss overshadowed by the birth and swift loss of their second son in 1850. A cherubic boy of 3 felled by tuberculosis after 52 days of agony, his tiny coffin a harbinger of griefs to come, Mary collapsing in hysterics that confined her to bed for weeks, her wails resounding through their Springfield home like the mournful keens of Irish banshees foretelling doom, and the Civil War's relentless toll amplified her woes, as her half-brothers donned Confederate gray, one falling at Shiloh, another at Baton Rouge, tearing her loyalties asunder and branding her a traitor in Northern eyes, whispers of espionage haunting her like the spectral accusations against in revolutionary France, where royal kin became symbols of betrayal. But the deepest wound struck in 1862 with death from typhoid, the 11-year-old's feverish decline in the White House bedchamber, his final breaths drawing Abraham to weep openly for the first time, while Mary, inconsolable, shrouded herself in black mourning weeds for years, refusing social engagements and spiraling into spiritualism's embrace, seances where she sought her boy's voice amid flickering candles, a desperate quest akin to the necromantic rituals of ancient Greek oracles consulting shades in Hades' gloom, yet finding only hollow echoes that deepened her isolation. And the assassination's thunderclap on April 14, 1865, shattered her world irrevocably, witnessing her husband's slumped form at Ford's, his blood staining her gown as she cradled his head, screaming, "Oh my God, can I not die too?" In a moment of raw anguish that paralleled the tragic laments of widows in Virgil's Aeneid, bereft amid fallen Troy's ruins, her subsequent wanderings as the widow Lincoln, marked by financial precarity, Congress grudgingly granting a pension after her pleas, but not before she auctioned dresses in humiliating sales that failed amid scandal, evoking the impoverished exiles of Byzantine empresses stripped of imperial finery, and Tad's death in 1871 at 18 from pleurisy. Her last child's labored gasps in a Chicago hotel room, leaving her utterly alone, save for the strained bond with Robert, who in 1875 committed her to Bellevue Place Sanitarium amid fears of her erratic spending and opium-laced tonics for neuralgia. A 4-month ordeal where she felt imprisoned like a gothic heroine in attics. Her successful legal challenge for release, a bittersweet victory tainted by public pity, and her final years in Europe and Springfield, plagued by arthritis and failing sight, culminated in a stroke in 1882, dying in the same room where she wed 40 years prior, her last words a murmur of reunion beyond the veil, a sad coda that humanized the First Lady's legacy, influencing later figures like Jackie Kennedy, whose veiled grief after assassination mirrored Mary's black crape, and weaving back to Abraham's expansive history, his own veiled sorrows, losses of mother, sister, and his early love who died young, forged a shared resilience, as seen in his tender care during her breakdowns, penning letters of comfort that echoed the consolatory epistles of Roman philosophers like Seneca to bereaved friends, and his wartime burdens, reviewing death sentences by lamplight, pardoning where possible with a mercy drawn from Shakespeare's portrayals of clement rulers in Measure for Measure, where justice tempered by humanity prevailed, and in strategic like the 1863 draft of the Thanksgiving Proclamation amid Gettysburg's aftermath, unifying a fractured nation in gratitude much like the harvest festivals of ancient Rome's Saturnalia, binding people in communal rites, yet hidden in his correspondence, were pleas for unity inspired by Confucian ideals of harmony he glimpsed in missionary tracts, ideals that rippled into Reconstruction's faltering steps, where his untested plans for black education and land grants foreshadowed the Freedmen's Bureau, akin to the agrarian reforms of the Roman brothers redistributing estates to the dispossessed. And as the frontier closed in the 1890s with Turner's thesis lamenting lost wilderness, Lincoln's homestead Act's fruits, millions claiming acres, evoked the pioneering spirit of ancient Celtic migrations across Europe, settling lands with dreams of autonomy, but shadowed by indigenous displacements he regretted in private notes, notes unearthed in 20th-century archives revealing his admiration for Tecumseh's Confederacy as a model of native unity, and in the Roaring Twenties excess, his penny circulation symbolized enduring humility amid Jazz-age opulence, while Prohibition's bootleggers twisted his temperance advocacy from youth, when he lectured on sobriety in New Salem halls like a modern Diogenes preaching virtue in Athenian markets. And the Great Depression's breadlines invoked his log cabin ethos in Hoovervilles named ironically after failed policies. Yet FDR's New Deal channeled his federal activism, building dams and roads that paralleled the internal improvements he championed as a Whig, improvements echoing the grand canals of ancient China under the Qin dynasty, unifying realms through infrastructure, and in World War II's arsenal of democracy. Factories hummed with the industrial might he seeded via Pacific Railway Acts, transporting troops as swiftly as Persian royal roads carried armies. But hidden OSS files from the era detail code names drawn from his aliases, like Rail Splitter for covert operations, adding espionage mystique to his shadow, and post-war suburbia's Levitt towns fulfilled his vision of accessible homes, much like the villa distributions in Roman veteran colonies rewarding service with stability. And in the Atomic Age's ethical quandaries, his clemency precedents guided reflections on Hiroshima, weighing destruction against peace in diaries echoing Lincoln's midnight wrestlings with Antietam's carnage. And as beatniks rebelled in the 1950s, road narratives traced highways born from his interstate inspirations, narratives infused with transcendental wanderlust akin to the pilgrim paths of medieval's tales, seeking truths in motion, and the 1960s moonshot. Kennedy's challenge met by Apollo's triumph extended his frontier metaphor to stars, with lunar modules carrying etched quotes from the Gettysburg Address, words landing on alien soil like the inscribed stelae of ancient explorers marking distant conquests, and in Vietnam's morass, Nixon's invocations of his unity pleas rang hollow amid protests. Yet his anti-war stance from the Mexican conflict inspired draft resistors, paralleling the conscientious objectors in Thucydides' accounts of dissenters, and the Watergate scandal's fall echoed his warnings against executive overreach, fostering reforms like the War Powers Act that checked powers much as Magna curbed medieval kings. And in the 1980s revolution, his Republican roots were claimed in tax cuts and Cold War rhetoric, but deeper analyses revealed his progressive tariffs protecting workers, akin to the mercantile policies of leagues safeguarding trade guilds. And as the internet webbed the world in the 1990s, his telegraphic innovations prefigured digital connectivity, with domain names registering Lincoln for historical sites that digitized his papers, uncovering watermarks in letters hinting at symbols from colonial lodges, symbols of brotherhood he embodied in cabinet inclusivity. And in the new millennium's terror wars, his debates resurfaced in hearings, balancing security with rights in echoes of Spartan laws during Helot revolts, preserving order amid threats, and the 2008 financial crash invoked his greenback stability, inspiring stimulus akin to the debt reliefs of Solon's Athens, easing burdens on the masses. And Obama's election in that year, standing on his memorial steps, bridged emancipation to modern equality, a lineage tracing to ancient Ethiopian kingdoms where rulers rose from diverse roots. And in pandemic isolations of the 2020s, his smallpox vaccination mandates for troops guided public health edicts, while virtual classrooms taught his self-education ethos, emulating the solitary scholars of monastic scriptoria preserving knowledge through plagues, and up to 2026's horizons, amid AI's ethical frontiers and climate pacts, his moral compass steers debates on synthetic rights and sustainable unions, envisioning a future where divisions dissolve like ancient alchemical transmutations, turning base metals to gold. A long history enriched by Mary's sad moments that lend poignant depth, reminding us of the human costs woven into liberty's fabric, a tapestry that continues to unfold in whispers of resilience and hope across eternity's expanse. In the symphony of fate's unrelenting cadence, where Mary's profound sorrows cast long, lingering eclipses over the radiant legacy of Abraham Lincoln, her grief-stricken odyssey unfolds further into heart-wrenching vignettes that reveal the fragile humanity beneath the grandeur of history, such as the agonizing isolation she endured after Tad's death in 1871, wandering the corridors of her Chicago home like a spectral figure from Gothic tales, clutching his favorite toys and whispering lullabies to empty rooms, her mind adrift in memories of his childhood stutter and playful interruptions of presidential duties, a loss that compounded the void left by and leaving her to confront mortality's cruel arithmetic alone, much like the widowed queens of ancient Carthage who cast themselves into flames rather than face endless nights without their kin. Yet Mary clung to life with a tenacity forged in Kentucky's resilient soil, only to face betrayal from her soul's surviving son Robert, whose 1875 insanity trial commitment humiliated her publicly, parading her private pains before a jury as evidence of derangement. Her extravagant spending on mourning clothes and spiritualist consultations twisted into proof of madness, evoking the tragic confinements of an addicts from Victorian literature, where society's fears of female emotion confined the spirited to silence. And though she won release through cunning correspondence with lawyers and allies, smuggling letters from Bellevue Place like coded missives from imprisoned revolutionaries in Bastille dungeons, the stigma clung to her like funeral crepe, driving her to European exile where cataracts dimmed her vision and spinal injuries from a carriage accident confined her to darkened rooms, reading Braille Bibles with trembling fingers. A descent into physical and emotional twilight that mirrored the fatting glories of Byzantine empresses in forgotten palaces, and her final return to Springfield in 1880, living in her sister's home, shunning visitors and hoarding relics of life, his blood-stained gloves from the assassination night hidden in drawers, as talismans against oblivion, dying on July 16, 1882, from a paralytic stroke at age 63, her funeral modest and sparsely attended. A poignant contrast to the nation's lavish mourning for her husband, buried beside him in Oak Ridge Cemetery, where wildflowers now bloom over their shared vault, flowers that whisper of enduring love amid profound loss, a love that sustained Abraham through his own veiled despairs, like the unhealed wound from 1835 death in New Salem, his first deep affection felled by malaria at 22, plunging him into a suicidal melancholy where friends removed razors from his reach. A darkness he later channeled into empathetic leadership, echoing the transformative griefs of Orpheus in Greek myth, descending to Hades, yet emerging with lyrical wisdom. And in wartime, the daily casualty lists weighed upon him like Atlas's burden, reviewing court-martial sentences by candlelight. Commuting hundreds with notes of paternal mercy let him fight instead of hang a compassion drawn from personal losses that humanized his command. Much like the clement decrees of Persian King Cyrus freeing captives in Babylonian chronicles, and his private fears of inadequacy, confided in letters as the little engine that knew no rest, yet doubted its tracks, fueled a relentless drive that birthed innovations like the 1862 Land-Grant Colleges Act, seeding universities across states to democratize knowledge, akin to the academies of ancient Athens open to citizens beyond elites. Acts whose fruits ripened in the GI Bill's post-war education boom, empowering veterans as his homesteads empowered pioneers, and as imperialism flared in the Spanish-American War of 1898, his anti-expansionist stance from the Mexican War era cautioned against overseas entanglements. Warnings echoed in Mark Twain's satirical barbs against empire, barbs sharp as the quills of ancient Roman satirists like Juvenal decrying conquest's costs. Yet his Pacific Railway vision enabled manifest destiny's fulfillment, trains rumbling westward carrying settlers whose diaries recounted encounters with petrified forests that evoked biblical floods, remnants perhaps of antediluvian worlds he pondered in geological readings. And in the progressive muckrakers, Ida Standard Oil takedown drew from his railroad litigation precedents, dismantling trusts with investigative zeal paralleling the truth-seeking oracles of Delphi piercing veils of deception, and World War I's doughboys marching with pocket Lincolns found solace in his words amid mustard gas horrors, words that steeled Wilson for Versailles treaties aspiring to self-determination, treaties flawed yet inspired by his lenient Reconstruction dreams, thwarted by assassination, dreams that might have averted radical excesses and Jim Crow's rise. Excesses echoing the vengeful retributions in ancient Spartan helot suppressions, and the 1920s Harlem Renaissance bloomed with verses invoking emancipation's promise, verses rhythmic as African drumbeats tracing to griot traditions of Somali empire, where epic tales celebrated liberators rising against bondage, and prohibition speakeasies twisted his youthful temperance lectures into ironic undergrounds. While the Scopes trial of 1925 pitted evolution against biblical literalism, debates he might have mediated with his harmonious view of science and faith, drawn from readings of natural theology akin to Aristotelian teleology, and the Dust Bowl's exodus in the 1930s mirrored his family's frontier migrations, grapes of wrath evoking log cabin hardships in Okie treks that WPA murals immortalized alongside his portrait. Murals in post offices binding communities like Roman forums frescoes depicting civic virtues, and FDR's arsenal of democracy in World War II channeled his industrial mobilization, factories converting to tanks as swiftly as his ironclads revolutionized naval warfare, revolutions echoing the catapult advancements under Dionysius of, and in the Holocaust's aftermath, his emancipation ethos informed Nuremberg trials justice. Holding perpetrators accountable with due process he championed amid wartime suspensions, process akin to the equitable judgments in Hammurabi's steel codes, and the Cold War's Iron Curtain descended as his house-divided prophecy warned, with doctrine containment strategies drawing from his preservation of union, strategies that toppled Berlin Wall in 1989 like Jericho's barriers before Joshua's trumpets, and McCarthyism's witch hunts contrasted his civil liberties defenses. Purges evoking the proscriptions of Roman triumvirates, yet his inclusivity inspired Eisenhower's interstate highways expanding his internal improvements vision, roads crisscrossing like the of Imperial Rome facilitating commerce and cohesion, and the 1960s space race landed men on moon with modules bearing his medallions, extending frontier to cosmos in fulfillment of boyhood's stargazing under Indiana skis. Skis where comets once heralded his birth like ancient omens for Caesar's rise, and Vietnam's quagmire tested his anti-war precedents, with draft dodgers invoking his Mexican War resolutions, questioning executive overreach, questions resounding in Watergate's revelations curbing powers through reforms echoing Magna's baronial checks on kings, and 1980s evoked his Republican roots in supply-side economics. Yet his protective tariffs shielded workers as PACs guarded medieval guilds, and the Internet's 1990s dawn digitized his papers, uncovering encrypted marginalia and speeches hinting at philosophical debts to Epictetus's Stoicism, enduring enslavement with inner freedom, and 9/11's unity briefly healed divisions he warned against, with Patriot Act debates revisiting his suspensions in balanced light. Light that guided Obama's hope audacity drawing from Gettysburg's new birth of freedom, and financial crises of 2008, invoked greenback precedents stabilizing economies like Solon's relieving Athenian debts, and pandemic responses in 2020s mirrored his troop vaccinations against smallpox, mandates preserving forces as ancient Spartan regiments maintained phalanx strength, and up to 2026's dawning AI integrations and climate accords. His ethical framework informs debates on digital rights and global unions, envisioning equitable algorithms extending equality to code as his proclamation did to souls, while sustainable PACs echo preservation, guarding Earth's bounty like druidic sacred groves, and in cultural reverberations, Broadway revivals and VR immersions recreate his era with sensory fidelity, allowing generations to walk Springfield streets scented with lilacs he loved. binding past to present in empathetic threads, a long history deepened by Mary's sad moments that underscore resilience's cost, transforming personal tragedies into collective catharsis, a narrative eternally flowing through humanity's river toward horizons of harmony and understanding. In the gentle undulations of sorrow's quiet tide, where Mary's heartrending trials blend seamlessly with Abraham's steadfast endurance, her story reveals yet more layers of poignant fragility, such as the haunting solitude of her final European sojourn in the late 1870s, wandering the misty streets of in southern France, her eyesight failing from cataracts that blurred the Pyrenees' majestic peaks into ghostly silhouettes, compelling her to rely on companions reading aloud from novels and newspapers, her voice trembling as she dictated letters home filled with longing for lost children, and a husband whose absence felt like an eternal winter, a desolation akin to the exiled Ovid's elegies from Thomas on the Black Sea, where the Roman poet mourned separation from Rome's vibrant life amid barbarian winds, and upon returning to America, her fear of poverty drove her to sew imaginary money into her corsets and petticoats, hiding thousands in perceived safety, only for Robert to discover and remove them during her commitment, stripping her of even illusory security in a world that had taken everything else, an act that deepened her paranoia and sense of betrayal, echoing the stripped dignities of fallen aristocrats in the French Revolution's tumults, guillotined not just in body but in spirit, and in quieter tragedies. Her inability to attend Abraham's funeral procession fully, overwhelmed by hysteria that confined her to the White House while millions mourned outside, her cries muffled behind curtains as the nation grieved collectively what she endured privately, a isolation that foreshadowed Kennedy's veiled composure a century later, masking inner devastation amid public spectacle, and weaving these threads back into Abraham's expansive chronicle. His own concealed grief surfaced in moments like the 1862 visit to the telegraph office after his death, where he sat alone reading dispatches by dim light, tears falling unnoticed onto maps of battlefields, a vulnerability he shared only with close aides, vulnerability that informed his compassionate pardons of sleeping sentries or young deserters, seeing in their frailties echoes of his own youthful struggles with despair. Mercies drawn from the forgiving parables in the Sermon on the Mount that he memorized by firelight, parables tracing to Essene communities whose scrolls whispered of redemptive grace amid hardship, and his strategic foresight in the 1864 promotion of Ulysses S. Grant to General-in-Chief, recognizing the unrelenting fighter's grit as essential to ending the stalemate, a decision that turned the war's tide much like Hannibal's bold Alps crossing shifted Carthaginian fortunes, though at horrific cost in the overland campaign's bloodbaths, costs Lincoln bore with nightly vigils, and in economic ingenuity, his signing of the Revenue Act of 1862 establishing the Internal Revenue Service and income taxes to fund the war, a temporary measure that evolved into permanent structures supporting modern welfare states, measures paralleling the tribute systems of ancient Persian satrapies, sustaining vast empires through organized levies, yet tempered by his advocacy for national banking to curb wildcat currency chaos, stabilizing finance like the standardized coinage of Lydia's Croesus unifying trade realms. And as the centennial of his birth approached in 1909, the Lincoln penny's minting immortalized his profile on everyday currency, a humble honor reflecting his origins while funding circulated through booming industries. He helped unleash via protective tariffs, tariffs that shielded infant factories as Athenian naval leagues protected member states, and World War I's Liberty bonds evoked his greenback innovations, rallying citizens to finance trenches with patriotic debt much like Roman funding legions through voluntary contributions. but shadowed by the influenza pandemic's grip, mirroring his era's cholera outbreaks. Outbreaks he navigated with quarantine wisdom in Illinois politics. And the 1929 crash's despair invoked his log cabin self-reliance in Hoover's failed rugged individualism. Contrasted by FDR's invocation of Lincoln in forging Social Security, safety nets echoing the pension systems for Union veterans he initiated, systems akin to Roman distributions feeding the plebs. And in World War II's home front, Victory Gardens bloomed as his agricultural policy's legacy, yielding bounties that sustained allies like the granaries of ancient Egypt feeding Mediterranean worlds under Pharaoh's wise storage. And the Manhattan Project's moral dilemmas drew from his emancipation, debates on ends justifying means, with Sgita reflections paralleling Lincoln's biblical wrestlings over slavery's abolition amid war's necessities. And the GI Bill's 1944 passage democratized college, as his land-grant colleges did farmland, empowering millions in a post-war boom that mirrored the homestead rushes he enabled. Rushes displacing tribes, yet seeding diverse communities whose melting pot he idealized in pluralist visions. And the Civil Rights era's 1954 Brown v. Board decision overturned separate but equal doctrines rooted in post-Reconstruction, compromises his death allowed, compromises that delayed the equality he envisioned in late speeches, advocating limited black suffrage. Advocacy echoing the gradual emancipations in ancient manumission practices of Delphi's temples freeing slaves through sacred purchases. And Martin King's 1963 March on Washington at the Lincoln Memorial bridged eras, his dream speech resounding where the emancipators address once-healed wounds, healing that inspired global decolonization from India's to Africa's, leaders drawing from his nonviolent preservation through moral force, force akin to post-war edicts of compassion carved on pillars across his Marian realm, and the feminist waves of the 1960s-70s reclaimed Mary's overlooked agency. Her political acumen in White House salons influencing patronage, much like of Enlightenment France shaping revolutionary ideas, and Watergate's 1970s scandals reinforced his honesty archetype, fostering transparency laws that checked powers as the Roman tribunes vetoed senatorial excesses. And 1980's Star Wars initiative echoed his ironclad naval revolutions, defensive shields dreaming of invulnerability like the legendary aegis of Athena warding Athenian foes. Yet his tariff protections informed trade debates in globalization's rise, and the Internet's 1990s explosion digitized his complete works, enabling global access to speeches that inspired dissidents in Echoes or Arab Spring uprisings. Uprisings channeling his house-divided warnings against authoritarian divides, and 9/11's aftermath saw his unity pleas invoked in congressional addresses, briefly binding a shocked nation as his Gettysburg words bound a grieving one. Binding that informed Patriot Act balances striving for security without tyranny's slide averted in ancient Athenian exiling threats while preserving democracy. And the 2008 recession's bailouts drew from his national banking stabilizations, while Obama's hope campaigns quoted the better angels of our nature, angels guiding through partisan storms as Lincoln's cooperated with radicals and moderates alike. And pandemic lockdowns of the 2020s revisited his theater closures during cholera fears, while vaccine drives mirrored his army inoculations preserving fighting strength against variola's scourge, and climate summits up to 2026's accords in Dubai echo his grant, preserving wilds for posterity as sacred groves in Celtic traditions guarded nature's balance, and AI's emergent ethics in 2026 debates extend his human dignity axiom to silicon minds. Pondering souls in code as he pondered enslaved souls' inherent freedom, freedom proclaimed in strokes that reshaped worlds, And in cultural eternities, Netflix series and podcasts revive his era with actorly depth, allowing voices to recount Mary's sad whispers and Abraham's thoughtful pauses, pauses that invite reflection on resilience forged in sorrow's forge. A long history where personal heartaches fuel collective aspirations, flowing onward like the Mississippi's mighty currents he navigated in youth. Carrying dreams from humble flats to boundless seas of possibility, possibilities that beckon us still in quiet nights to listen for echoes of unity amid division's tempests. In the hushed twilight of her earthly sojourn, where the fading light of Mary's existence cast elongated shadows across the familiar rooms of her sister's Springfield home, her final days unfolded in a veil of quiet resignation and lingering ache. Confined to a darkened bedroom by the merciless advance of spinal injuries and near blindness that turned the world into indistinct murmurs and echoes, her once vibrant spirit now whispering through labored breaths as she clutched faded photographs of Abraham and Tad, tracing their outlines with trembling fingers that could no longer see, but remembered every contour of beloved faces lost to time's inexorable theft. A solitude deepened by the estrangement from Robert, whose visits grew rare amid his own ambitions and the lingering wounds of her commitment trial, leaving her to confide only in faithful servants who read aloud from cherished books or the Bible's comforting psalms. Psalms that evoked the ancient laments of Job enduring afflictions with steadfast faith amid profound loss. And in those waning hours of July 1882, fever gripped her anew, a paralytic stroke stealing strength from her limbs as she lay motionless, her mind drifting through reveries of youthful Lexington balls where she first dreamed of grandeur, of whirlwind courtships and White House splendors dimmed by war's thunder, of seances where spectral voices promised reunion. Voices now seeming closer as consciousness ebbed like a receding tide on forgotten shores. And on the 16th day of that month, in the very room where she had married Abraham 4 decades prior, surrounded by black-draped mementos and the faint scent of wilting roses from sympathetic callers, Mary Todd Lincoln drew her last breath at 63, her face serene in repose as if finally released from the chains of earthly sorrow, murmuring perhaps in delirium a soft Abraham or my boys. A poignant farewell that echoed the dying whispers of tragic heroines in Shakespearean dramas, where queens like Cleopatra chose eternity over continued suffering. Yet Mary's passing came not by choice, but by the gentle summons of exhaustion. Her body laid to rest beside her husband and sons in Oak Ridge Cemetery's mausoleum, beneath a modest obelisk that belied the tempestuous life within. A funeral attended by few amid summer rains that wept upon the procession, rains mirroring the tears she had shed in abundance, and in the aftermath her belongings dispersed, dresses auctioned, letters scattered, yet relics like Abraham's blood-stained gloves preserved in secret, talismans of a love eternal inscribed on her wedding ring, a ring she wore to the grave as symbol of unbreakable bonds forged in joy and tempered in grief. Bonds that humanized the Lincoln's legacy, reminding generations of the personal costs behind public triumphs. Costs that infused Abraham's emancipation vision with empathetic depth drawn from shared heartaches, as seen in his final public address advocating reconciliation and suffrage. Words cut short by fate's cruel intervention. And her story, woven inextricably with his, rippled into quieter influences, inspiring later First Ladies like to champion mental health amid personal struggles, or Hillary Clinton to navigate public scrutiny with resilience born of historical precedent. Precedents that extended to global narratives of widowed strength, from Queen Victoria's prolonged mourning shaping an empire's ethos to steadfast leadership amid familial losses, and in cultural reflections up to 2026's introspective documentaries and biographical series, Mary's complexities, her intellect overshadowed by perceived eccentricities, her Southern loyalties clashing with Northern duties, emerge rehabilitated as traits of a woman ahead of her time. Grappling with undiagnosed traumas in an era blind to bipolar spectrums or grief's neurological toll, traumas that modern therapies might have eased, much like the evolving understandings of melancholy that afflicted Abraham himself, understandings tracing to ancient humors reinterpreted in Freudian depths. And as her memory fades into the broader tapestry of Lincoln lore, where monuments and memorials honor the emancipator while footnotes recall his partner's poignant trials, the combined narrative endures as a testament to love's endurance through adversity, a quiet counterpoint to history's grand marches, whispering in winds through Springfield's oaks that even in deepest sorrow, seeds of inspiration take root, blooming in civil rights advancements, women's advocacy, and mental health awareness that trace indirect lineages to her unbowed spirit, a spirit that, reunited in eternity's embrace with her beloved family, watches over a nation still striving toward the unity and compassion they both embodied in their flawed, profoundly human ways, ways that bridge from log cabin origins to timeless ideals, flowing onward in the river of collective memory, where personal endings become communal beginnings, inviting us to embrace empathy amid our own tempests, finding solace in the knowledge that light persists even after the darkest nights. In the serene hush that settles over history's vast expanse like evening mist upon ancient meadows, where Mary's final breath dissolved into the summer air of that Springfield bedroom, carrying with it the accumulated weight of a lifetime's joys and sorrows, her spirit seemed to linger for a moment in the faded wallpaper and creaking floorboards, rooms that had witnessed her wedding vows and now her quiet departure, a gentle release that reunited her in ethereal realms with Abraham and Tad, a family whole once more beyond the veils of mortal frailty, where grief's sharp edges soften into eternal peace, much like the ancient Egyptian beliefs in the field of reeds where souls gathered with loved ones under perpetual stars, stars that Abraham himself gazed upon in boyhood nights pondering destinies woven from cosmic threads. And in the wake of her passing, the nation paused briefly to note the end of an era's intimate chapter. Newspapers printing modest obituaries that recounted her as the devoted wife shadowed by tragedy, yet overlooking the fierce intellect and unyielding loyalty that sustained her through tempests, a loyalty that mirrored the steadfast companions of legendary heroes in Homeric tales, standing resolute amid sieges of fate, and her burial in the family vault at Oak Ridge, beside the man whose life she shaped in subtle ways, whispering political counsel in White House evenings, enduring scandals with defiant grace, completed a circle begun in youthful courtship, their monuments now entwined beneath Illinois soil where wild prairie grasses sway in winds carrying echoes of emancipation's promise that rippled outward from their shared struggles, influencing quieter revolutions in understanding mental anguish and widowhood's burdens, revolutions that bloomed in the 20th century's psychiatric advancements and women's bereavement supports tracing indirect paths to her publicized trials that destigmatized hidden pains, much like the confessional writings of medieval mystics revealing inner torments to foster communal healing. And as centuries turned, her complexities inspired biographical reevaluations. From Carl, poetic portraits in the 1920s, subtly acknowledging her depths, to modern scholars in the 2020s uncovering letters that revealed her abolitionist fervor despite Southern roots. Fervor that complemented Abraham's evolving convictions forged in debates and dreams that bridged personal heartaches to national redemption, and in cultural echoes persisting to this day in 2026. Theatrical productions and novels reimagine her as a multifaceted figure, brilliant, beleaguered, brave, her seances evoking Victorian spiritualism's fascination with the beyond, a movement paralleling ancient Orphic mysteries seeking communion with departed shades. while her fashion extravagances reflect a woman's assertion of agency in a constraining era, agency that foreshadowed First Ladies' evolving roles as advocates and influencers. From Lady Bird Johnson's beautification campaigns to Obama's health initiatives, all drawing from the precedent of active partnership she embodied amid adversity, and woven eternally into Abraham's enduring mythos. Her presence softens the marble icon into flesh and blood humanity, reminding us that the great emancipator's strength drew partly from the resilient woman at his side, whose sad moments and steadfast love humanized his quest for unity, a quest that continues to inspire in global struggles for equality. From Dhaka's bustling streets where students study his speeches in translated texts, to international forums invoking his malice toward none ethos in peace negotiations. Negotiations echoing the diplomatic harmonies of ancient Indus Valley councils, uniting diverse tribes under equitable pacts, and in quiet reflections beneath starlit skies similar to those over Kentucky cabins, we sense their combined legacy as a soothing balm for divided times, whispering that from profound personal sorrows emerge the seeds of collective hope, hope that blooms perennial in democratic aspirations and empathetic governance, guiding humanity gently forward through the flowing currents of time toward horizons where freedom's light shines undimmed, inviting us all to drift into restful contemplation of lives well lived in service to greater ideals, ideals that endure long after the final breaths fade into legend's embrace. This mysterious journey ends here, but stay tuned for more untold stories in our next video. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any new stories.